The morning sun barely peeked through the small windows of the military mess hall as Sarah Chen walked through the double doors. At 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing just over 120 pounds, she didn't look like much to the other soldiers eating their breakfast. Her short black hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her uniform looked exactly the same as everyone else's. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was anything more than another Marine trying to grab some coffee before morning drills. Sarah had been up since 4 in the morning, same as always. While other soldiers were still sleeping, she had already completed a 5-mile run, done 200 push-ups, and finished her morning meditation. This routine had been part of her life for the past 8 years, ever since she joined a special unit that most people didn't even know existed. The mess hall buzzed with the usual morning chatter. Soldiers sat at long metal tables eating scrambled eggs and toast while complaining about their commanding officers or talking about their weekend plans. Sarah grabbed a plastic tray and got in line behind a group of Marines who were discussing the previous night's baseball game. She kept her head down, preferring to blend in rather than draw attention to herself. That was always the plan. Stay quiet, stay invisible, and let people think whatever they wanted to think. It made her job easier when people underestimated her. In her line of work, being underestimated could mean the difference between life and death. "Move it along, lady," said a voice behind her. Sarah glanced back to see a tall Marine with broad shoulders and a scowl on his face. His name tag read Martinez, and she could tell by the way he carried himself that he thought he owned the place. "Some of us have real work to do today." Sarah didn't respond. She simply turned back around and continued moving through the line. She had dealt with men like Martinez before. They were usually all talk and no action, the type who felt the need to prove themselves by picking on people they thought were weaker than them. The line moved slowly as the kitchen staff served up portions of eggs, bacon, and toast. Sarah asked for just coffee and a piece of toast. She wasn't very hungry, and she had another training session scheduled for later that morning. Heavy meals made her feel sluggish during combat exercises. As she turned to find a seat, Sarah noticed that most of the tables were full. The mess hall was always crowded during breakfast hours, especially on weekdays when everyone had to report for duty. She spotted an empty chair at a table near the back corner and started walking toward it. "Hey, watch where you're going," Martinez called out again. Sarah realized he had been following her through the line and was now walking behind her with his own tray of food. "You're moving like you've got all day." Sarah continued walking without acknowledging him. She had learned early in her military career that engaging with bullies usually made things worse. The best strategy was to ignore them and hope they found someone else to bother. But Martinez wasn't the type to be ignored. As Sarah approached the empty table, he stepped around her and plopped his tray down at the spot she had been heading for. "Thanks for keeping my seat warm," he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. The other Marines at the table looked uncomfortable. They could see what was happening, but nobody wanted to get involved. Martinez was known for having a short temper, and most people preferred to stay out of his way rather than risk becoming his next target. Sarah stood there for a moment, holding her tray and looking around the mess hall. All the other tables were full, and she didn't feel like standing around waiting for someone to finish eating. She decided to just take her coffee and toast back to her barracks room. "Smart choice," Martinez said as she turned to leave. "This table is for real Marines anyway." That comment stopped Sarah in her tracks. She had spent 8 years proving herself to be more than just a real Marine. She had completed training programs that 90% of men couldn't finish. She had been deployed to combat zones that most soldiers never even heard about. She had saved lives and completed missions that would have been impossible for someone like Martinez. But she couldn't tell him any of that. Her assignments were classified, and her unit didn't officially exist according to military records. As far as anyone knew, she was just another Marine with a desk job somewhere on the base. Sarah took a deep breath and continued walking toward the exit. She could hear Martinez laughing with his friends behind her, probably making jokes about how easy it was to intimidate the little Asian girl. She had heard variations of those jokes her entire military career. Just as she reached the door, Sarah heard footsteps behind her. She turned around to see Martinez approaching with an ugly expression on his face. "I wasn't done talking to you," he said loudly enough for half the mess hall to hear. "When a superior Marine tells you to move, you say, 'Yes, sir,' and you move faster next time." Sarah looked around and noticed that the entire mess hall had gone quiet. Everyone was watching to see what would happen next. Some of the soldiers looked curious, others looked uncomfortable, but nobody seemed inclined to intervene. "I'm not looking for any trouble," Sarah said quietly. "I was just trying to get some breakfast and leave." "Well, maybe next time you'll think twice before getting in my way," Martinez replied. "Marines like me have earned the right to eat in peace without having to deal with—" He paused, looking her up and down with obvious disdain. "People like you." Sarah felt her jaw tighten. She had dealt with discrimination her entire life, first for being Asian American, and then for being a woman in a male-dominated military. Usually, she could let the comments roll off her back, but something about Martinez's tone and the way everyone was staring made her blood start to boil. "I have just as much right to be here as you do," she said, keeping her voice level despite the anger building inside her. Martinez laughed. "Right? You think you have rights? You're nothing but a diversity hire, sweetheart. The only reason they let people like you join up is to make the politicians feel good about themselves." The mess hall was completely silent now. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working to see what was happening. Sarah could feel dozens of eyes on her, waiting to see if she would back down or stand up for herself. "I earned my place here the same way you did," Sarah replied, "through hard work and dedication." "Hard work?" Martinez stepped closer, his voice getting louder. "What would you know about hard work? You've probably never seen real combat in your life. You've probably spent your whole military career filing paperwork and making coffee for real soldiers." Sarah wanted to tell him about the missions she had completed in Afghanistan and Iraq. She wanted to describe the firefights she had survived and the enemies she had eliminated. She wanted to explain that she had been awarded several medals for valor that were locked away in classified files. But she couldn't say any of that without violating her security clearance. "You don't know anything about me," was all she could manage to say. "I know enough," Martinez said with a sneer. "I know that you don't belong here, and I know that real Marines shouldn't have to put up with having their breakfast interrupted by people who are just playing soldier." He reached out and poked her in the shoulder with his finger. It wasn't a hard push, but it was enough to make Sarah take a step backward. The gesture was clearly meant to humiliate her in front of everyone watching. "Don't touch me," Sarah said, her voice now carrying a warning tone that Martinez was too arrogant to recognize. "Or what?" He laughed. "You'll file a complaint? You'll run crying to your commanding officer? Face it, lady, you're out of your league here." He poked her shoulder again, harder this time. Sarah felt her training kick in automatically. Every instinct she had developed through years of combat experience was telling her to neutralize the threat in front of her. Her hand started to move toward a defensive position before she caught herself. She couldn't fight back. Not here, not in front of all these witnesses, and not without revealing skills that were supposed to remain secret. No matter how much Martinez deserved it, she had to walk away. "That's what I thought," Martinez said when she didn't respond. "All talk and no action. Just like every other fake soldier they've been bringing in lately." Sarah turned to leave again, but Martinez stepped in front of her, blocking her path to the door. "I'm not done with you yet," he said. "I think you owe me an apology for wasting my time and disrupting my breakfast." "I'm not apologizing for anything," Sarah replied. "Now please get out of my way." "Please?" Martinez mocked. "Oh, how polite. But I don't think please is going to cut it. I think you need to learn some respect For your betters." The tension in the room was becoming unbearable. Sarah could see some of the other Marines looking toward the door, probably hoping that an officer would walk in and break up the confrontation. But no help was coming, and Martinez seemed to be enjoying having an audience. "Last chance," he said, stepping even closer. "Apologize for being disrespectful to a superior Marine, and maybe I'll let you slink back to whatever hole they've got you working in." Sarah looked around the mess hall one more time. Every face she could see was focused on her, waiting to see if she would submit to Martinez's bullying or find a way to stand up for herself. She thought about all the men and women she had served with in her special unit, people who had trusted her with their lives and never questioned her ability to get the job done. She thought about the missions she had completed successfully, the enemies she had eliminated, and the American lives she had saved. She thought about the years of training that had turned her into one of the most lethal weapons the military had ever produced. And she thought about how none of that mattered right now, because she was trapped by the need to maintain her cover. "I'm waiting," Martinez said impatiently. Sarah looked him directly in the eyes and spoke in a voice that was calm, but carried an unmistakable edge. "I'm not apologizing to you or anyone else. I haven't done anything wrong, and I'm not going to be intimidated by someone who thinks rank gives him the right to bully people." Martinez's face turned red with anger. "You just made a big mistake, little girl." Without warning, he drew his hand back and slapped her across the face. The sound echoed through the silent mess hall like a gunshot. Sarah's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow, and she could taste blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. The mess hall remained completely silent. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, and nobody came to her aid. They just sat there watching, some with shocked expressions, and others with looks that suggested they thought she had gotten what she deserved. Sarah slowly turned her head back to face Martinez. Her cheek was red and starting to swell, but her expression was completely calm. She looked at him with the same detached professionalism she had used when studying enemy targets through a rifle scope. "You're going to regret that," she said quietly. Martinez laughed again, but this time his laughter sounded a little forced. Something in Sarah's eyes had changed, and even someone as arrogant as him could sense that he might have just crossed a line he didn't fully understand. "What are you going to do about it?" he asked, but his voice lacked the confidence it had carried just moments earlier. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She was calculating options, assessing threats, and considering consequences just like she had been trained to do in combat situations. Part of her wanted to show Martinez exactly what she was capable of, but the rational part of her brain knew that would create more problems than it would solve. Instead, she simply picked up her tray from where she had set it down and walked toward the door. Martinez watched her go, apparently unsure whether he had won the confrontation or just started something he wouldn't be able to finish. As Sarah reached the exit, she paused and looked back at the room full of Marines who had watched her get humiliated without lifting a finger to help. Some of them looked ashamed, others looked relieved that the drama was over, and a few looked like they were already planning to spread gossip about what they had witnessed. "This isn't over," Martinez called out, apparently feeling the need to get the last word in front of his audience. Sarah looked at him for a long moment before responding. "No," she said quietly. "It's not." Then she walked out of the mess hall, leaving behind a room full of soldiers who had no idea they had just watched someone with the skills to kill them all without breaking a sweat choose to walk away instead of fighting back. As the door closed behind her, conversations slowly resumed throughout the mess hall. But the atmosphere had changed. Something significant had just happened, though most of the witnesses didn't understand what it was. Martinez returned to his table and tried to act like nothing unusual had occurred, but several of his friends noticed that his hands were shaking slightly as he picked up his coffee cup. And in the back corner of the mess hall, A grizzled sergeant who had been eating breakfast in silence made a mental note to find out more about the small Asian woman who had just been assaulted by one of his Marines. Something about her reaction had seemed oddly familiar, like the controlled response of someone who had seen real combat and knew how to handle herself in dangerous situations. He had a feeling that Martinez had just picked a fight with the wrong person, and he wanted to know more about who she really was before things got out of hand. Sarah Chen walked across the base with her coffee growing cold in her hands, her cheek still stung from Martinez's slap. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the frustration burning inside her chest. She had been trained to handle threats, to neutralize enemies, to complete impossible missions under extreme pressure. But she had never been trained to deal with the humiliation of being assaulted in front of dozens of witnesses while being forced to do nothing in response. She made her way to Building C, a nondescript concrete structure that housed various administrative offices. To most people on the base, it looked like any other boring military building where clerks pushed paper and processed personnel files. But Sarah knew that beneath the ordinary exterior lay something much more important. She walked through the main entrance and nodded to the receptionist, a middle-aged woman named Barbara who had been working there for 15 years. Barbara smiled and waved, just like she did every morning. As far as she knew, Sarah worked in the personnel records department on the second floor. Instead of heading upstairs, Sarah turned down a hallway that led to a maintenance closet. She pulled out her ID card and swiped it through a hidden scanner built into what looked like a light switch. There was a soft click, and the back wall of the closet slid open to reveal an elevator. The elevator descended 3 floors below ground level, finally opening into a corridor that looked nothing like the building above. The walls were made of reinforced steel, and security cameras monitored every inch of the hallway. This was where Sarah's real work took place, in a facility that didn't exist on any official military blueprints. She walked to the end of the corridor and entered a room that served as both a briefing area and a training facility. Computer monitors lined one wall, displaying maps, satellite images, and classified intelligence reports from around the world. Weapons racks held equipment that wasn't available to regular military units, and exercise mats covered the floor for hand-to-hand combat practice. 3 other people were already in the room when Sarah arrived. Lieutenant Commander James Rodriguez was studying a file at one of the computer stations. Rodriguez was a former Navy SEAL who had been recruited into their unit 5 years earlier. He was built like a linebacker and had a reputation for being able to infiltrate enemy positions without being detected despite his size. Sitting at a table in the center of the room was Captain Lisa Park, a former Army Ranger who specialized in explosives and demolition. Park was known for her ability to build bombs out of household items and for once destroying an entire enemy compound using nothing but fertilizer and diesel fuel. The third person was Master Sergeant David Thompson, who was cleaning a sniper rifle with the methodical precision that had made him one of the most feared marksmen in special operations. Thompson held the record for the longest confirmed kill shot in military history, though that information was classified at the highest levels. These were Sarah's teammates, the people who knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. In this room, she wasn't just another Marine trying to fit in. She was Petty Officer Sarah Chen, one of the most highly trained special operations soldiers in the American military. "You're late," Rodriguez said without looking up from his file. "And you look like hell. What happened to your face?" Sarah touched her cheek, which had started to bruise where Martinez had hit her. She had hoped the mark wouldn't be too obvious, but nothing got past Rodriguez's trained eye. "I had a disagreement with another Marine in the mess hall," she said, setting her coffee down on the table. Park looked up with interest. "Disagreement? Looks more like someone took a swing at you." Someone did. Sarah sat down across from Park and briefly described what had happened with Martinez. She kept her tone professional and factual, the same way she would report any other mission detail. When she finished, Thompson set down his rifle and shook his head. You should have dropped him where he stood. Nobody puts their hands on a member of this team. I couldn't, Sarah explained. Too many witnesses, and it would have blown my cover. If I had fought back the way I wanted to, people would have started asking questions about where I learned those skills. Rodriguez closed his file and turned to face the group. She did the right thing. Our mission depends on maintaining our cover identities. If Sarah had revealed her training, it could have compromised all of our operations. Easy for you to say, Park replied. You weren't the one getting humiliated in front of half the base. There has to be a way to handle this without blowing our cover. Before anyone could respond, the door to the briefing room opened and Colonel Harrison walked in. Harrison was the commanding officer of their unit, a veteran of 30 years who had personally recruited each member of the team. He was one of only a dozen people in the entire military who knew about their existence. Good morning, Harrison said, but his expression suggested that the morning was anything but good. Chen, I heard about the incident in the mess hall. Are you all right? Yes, sir, Sarah replied. It was just a minor altercation. Minor? Harrison sat down at the head of the table. According to my sources, you were publicly assaulted by Staff Sergeant Martinez in front of at least 50 witnesses. That doesn't sound minor to me. Sarah was surprised that Harrison had already heard about what happened. It had been less than an hour since she left the mess hall, but apparently word traveled fast on a military base. Sir, I handled the situation appropriately given the circumstances, she said. I maintained my cover and avoided escalating the confrontation. Harrison nodded. You did exactly what you were supposed to do, and I'm proud of you for showing that kind of restraint. But we have a problem. Martinez has been running his mouth all morning, telling anyone who will listen about how he put some fake soldier in her place. Park clenched her fists. He's talking about Chen like she's some kind of joke. If people start believing that story, it could affect morale and discipline across the base. It gets worse, Harrison continued. Martinez has apparently decided that his little victory this morning means he can continue harassing Chen whenever he feels like it. He's been asking around, trying to find out where she works and what her duties are. Thompson looked up from his rifle. That could be a security risk. If he starts digging into Chen's background, he might stumble across information that leads back to us. Harrison turned to Sarah. How much does Martinez know about your assignment? Nothing, Sarah replied. As far as he knows, I'm just another Marine with some kind of administrative job. But if he starts investigating, he might notice that my official records don't match up with reality. Their cover stories were designed to withstand casual scrutiny, but they wouldn't hold up if someone started doing serious research. Sarah's official file listed her as a personnel specialist with no combat experience. But a determined investigator might notice inconsistencies in her training records or deployment history. We need to shut this down before it goes any further, Rodriguez said. If Martinez keeps pushing, he's going to force us to take action that we'd all prefer to avoid. Harrison was quiet for a moment, clearly considering their options. Finally, he spoke. I've been in contact with Martinez's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Stevens. Stevens is aware of the situation and is planning to have a conversation with Martinez about appropriate conduct. Will that be enough? Park asked. It should be, Harrison replied. Stevens doesn't tolerate bullying or harassment in his unit. He'll make it clear to Martinez that his behavior is unacceptable and that there will be consequences if it continues. Sarah felt a mix of relief and frustration. She was glad that someone was finally going to hold Martinez accountable for his actions, but she hated the fact that she needed other people to fight her battles for her. What if Martinez doesn't listen? She asked. What if he decides to keep pushing? Harrison's expression grew serious. Then we'll have to consider more direct options, but let's hope it doesn't come to that. The colonel stood up and walked over to one of the computer monitors. In the meantime, We have other matters to discuss. Intelligence has identified a new target that requires our attention." He pressed a button, and the monitor displayed a satellite image of a compound in a mountainous region. "This is a terrorist training camp in Afghanistan. Our sources indicate that they're planning attacks against American interests in the region." Rodriguez leaned forward to study the image. "Looks heavily defended. How many hostiles are we talking about?" "Estimated 30 to 40 fighters with automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades," Harrison replied. "The Afghan military has requested our assistance in taking out the camp before they can launch their planned attacks." Thompson examined the terrain around the compound. "Rough country, limited approach routes, and plenty of places for the enemy to set up ambushes." "That's why we need our best team on this mission," Harrison said, looking directly at Sarah. "Chen, I know you're dealing with personal issues right now, but I need to know if you're ready to deploy." Sarah didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir. I'm ready." "Are you sure? Getting slapped around by some bully this morning might have affected your confidence or your focus." Sarah felt a flash of anger at the suggestion that Martinez's assault had somehow compromised her ability to do her job. "With respect, sir, it will take more than Staff Sergeant Martinez to affect my performance in the field." Harrison smiled. "That's what I wanted to hear. All right, people. We deploy in 72 hours. Start your mission preparation immediately." Over the next 3 days, Sarah threw herself into preparing for the Afghanistan deployment. She studied maps of the target area, reviewed intelligence reports on the enemy fighters, and spent hours in the shooting range making sure her marksmanship skills were sharp. The work helped her focus on something other than the humiliation she had experienced in the mess hall. But Martinez wasn't done with her yet. On the second day, Sarah was walking back to her barracks room after a long day of mission planning when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around to see Martinez approaching with 2 of his friends. "Well, look who it is," Martinez said with a grin. "The little mouse who thinks she's a real soldier." Sarah kept walking, hoping they would lose interest and leave her alone. But Martinez and his friends matched her pace, continuing to follow her across the base. "I heard you've been asking around about me," Martinez continued, "trying to get me in trouble with my commanding officer." That wasn't very smart. Sarah hadn't asked anyone about Martinez, but she didn't bother correcting him. Whatever story he had told himself about recent events, she wasn't going to change his mind by arguing with him. "You know what I think?" Martinez said, stepping closer. "I think you need another lesson in showing proper respect to your superiors." One of Martinez's friends, a corporal named Jenkins, laughed. "Maybe we should find somewhere private to have this conversation." Sarah felt her training kick in again. 3 men following her, making threats, and suggesting they move to a location with no witnesses. This was beginning to look like more than just harassment. She casually adjusted her path to stay in areas with good lighting and security cameras. If these men were planning to assault her, she wanted there to be evidence of what happened. "I don't want any trouble," Sarah said, keeping her voice calm and steady. "I'm just trying to get back to my room." "Too bad," Martinez replied. "Trouble seems to follow you around. Maybe if you weren't such a smartass, people would treat you better." They followed her all the way to the entrance of her barracks building. Sarah used her key card to open the door, hoping that Martinez and his friends would give up once they realized they couldn't follow her inside without proper authorization. Instead, Martinez grabbed the door before it could close and pushed his way into the building behind her. "You know, I don't think we're done talking yet," he said. Sarah turned to face him in the lobby of the barracks. This was definitely crossing a line. Martinez had no business being in this building, and his presence here could be considered a serious violation of military regulations. "You need to leave," Sarah said firmly. "You're not authorized to be in this building." "Who's going to make me leave?" Martinez asked. "You?" Sarah looked around the lobby and realized they were alone. It was late evening, and most people were either in their rooms or off base for the night. There was no one around to witness what was happening or to call for help if things got out of hand. Martinez seemed to realize the same thing. His grin became wider and more menacing as he stepped closer to Sarah. "You know what your problem is?" he said. "You think you're special. You think you deserve the same respect as real Marines who have actually earned their place in the military." Sarah backed away until she felt the wall behind her. Martinez and his two friends had her cornered, and she was running out of options for avoiding a confrontation. "I think it's time someone taught you about the real military hierarchy," Martinez continued, "starting with a lesson in knowing your place." He reached out to grab Sarah's arm, but this time she was ready for him. Without thinking, she caught his wrist and twisted it in a way that sent him stumbling backward. The move was pure instinct, the result of years of combat training that had become second nature. Martinez looked shocked. The casual ease with which Sarah had deflected his grab was completely unexpected. For a moment, he just stared at her with confusion and surprise. Then his expression changed to anger. "You think you know how to fight?" he snarled. "Let me show you what real combat looks like." He came at her again, this time throwing a punch aimed at her face. Sarah ducked under the punch and responded with an elbow strike to Martinez's ribs that knocked the wind out of him. He doubled over, gasping for breath and clutching his side. Jenkins and the other Marine moved to help their friend, but Sarah was already in full combat mode. She kicked Jenkins in the knee, sending him crashing to the floor, then grabbed the third man and threw him into the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. The entire fight lasted less than 30 seconds. When it was over, all three men were on the ground, groaning in pain and looking at Sarah with expressions of shock and fear. Sarah stood over them, breathing heavily and feeling the adrenaline coursing through her system. For the first time in days, she felt like herself again. This was who she really was, not the timid victim Martinez had humiliated in the mess hall. But as the adrenaline faded, she realized what she had just done. She had revealed skills that no ordinary Marine was supposed to have. She had responded to a threat with the kind of precision and efficiency that came from special operations training. Martinez slowly got to his feet, still clutching his ribs. "What the hell are you?" he whispered. Before Sarah could answer, the lobby door opened and Colonel Harrison walked in. He took one look at the scene in front of him and immediately understood what had happened. "Gentlemen," he said to Martinez and his friends, "I think it's time for you to leave. Now." The three men didn't argue. They limped out of the building as quickly as they could manage, leaving Sarah alone with Harrison. "Are you all right?" the colonel asked. Sarah nodded. "Yes, sir, but I think my cover might be compromised." Harrison looked at the cracked wall where Sarah had thrown one of her attackers. "I think you might be right about that." The next morning, word of the fight in the barracks spread across the base like wildfire. Marines who had witnessed Sarah's humiliation in the mess hall were now hearing impossible stories about how she had single-handedly defeated three men in hand-to-hand combat. Most people assumed the stories were exaggerated, but a few began to wonder if there was more to the quiet Asian woman than met the eye. Martinez spent the night in the base medical facility, being treated for 2 cracked ribs and a dislocated wrist. His friends received treatment for a torn ligament in Jenkins's knee and a concussion for the third man, whose name was Robinson. All 3 men claimed they had been attacked without provocation, but the security cameras in the barracks lobby told a different story. Colonel Harrison sat in his office, reviewing the footage for the 5th time. The cameras clearly showed Martinez and his friends following Sarah into the building where they had no authorization to be. They showed Martinez grabbing Sarah's arm and throwing the first punch, and they showed Sarah's response, which was unlike anything Harrison had ever seen from someone who was supposed to be a personnel specialist. The way Sarah moved in that fight was unmistakably the product of advanced military training. Her techniques were precise, efficient, and designed to neutralize multiple opponents quickly. No ordinary Marine could have done what she did, and Harrison knew it was only a matter of time before other people reached the same conclusion. There was a knock at his office door. "Come in!" Harrison called out. Lieutenant Colonel Stevens entered, looking frustrated and concerned. Stevens was Martinez's commanding officer, and he had spent the morning trying to figure out how 3 of his Marines had ended up in the hospital after allegedly attacking a single woman. "We need to talk," Stevens said, closing the door behind him. "My men are claiming they were assaulted by one of your people, but the security footage tells a completely different story." Harrison gestured for Stevens to sit down. "What exactly are your men saying happened?" "According to Martinez, he was just trying to have a conversation with Petty Officer Chen when she suddenly went crazy and attacked them. He claims she must have some kind of martial arts background that isn't in her official records." Harrison kept his expression neutral. "And what do you think happened?" Stevens pulled out his tablet and showed Harrison a screenshot from the security footage. "I think Martinez and his friends cornered Chen in that lobby with the intention of intimidating or assaulting her. I think she defended herself using skills that shouldn't exist according to her personnel file. And I think there's a lot more to this story than either of us is being told." Harrison studied the image on the tablet. It showed Sarah in mid-motion, throwing Robinson into the wall with a technique that was clearly the product of professional training. "You're right," Harrison admitted. "There is more to the story, but I'm not authorized to discuss the details with you." Stevens leaned forward. "Classified?" "Very classified. All I can tell you is that Petty Officer Chen is exactly where she's supposed to be, doing exactly what she's supposed to be doing. The fact that she was able to defend herself should not be seen as suspicious or concerning." "But her records show no combat training beyond basic self-defense courses," Stevens protested. "Where did she learn to fight like that?" Harrison stood up and walked to the window of his office. Outside, he could see Marines going about their daily routines, completely unaware of the conversation taking place above them. "Some people have training that doesn't appear in their official files," Harrison said carefully. "Some people serve their country in ways that require a certain level of discretion." Stevens was quiet for a moment, processing what Harrison had told him. Finally, he spoke again. "Are you telling me that Chen is some kind of special operations soldier?" "I'm telling you that Martinez and his friends picked a fight with the wrong person," Harrison replied. "And I'm telling you that if this incident becomes public knowledge, it could compromise national security." The seriousness in Harrison's voice made Stevens understand that this was not a situation he wanted to pursue further. Whatever Sarah Chen really was, it was clearly above his security clearance level. "What do you want me to do about my men?" Stevens asked. "Martinez and his friends assaulted a fellow service member on base property," Harrison said. "They followed her into a building where they had no authorization to be, and they initiated physical contact. The security footage proves all of that. I suggest you handle this situation accordingly." Stevens nodded. "I'll file charges against all 3 of them: assault, harassment, and unauthorized entry. Martinez will probably face a court-martial." "That would be appropriate," Harrison agreed. After Stevens left, Harrison sat alone in his office, thinking about the larger implications of what had happened. Sarah's cover identity had been blown, and there was no way to put that genie back in the bottle. Too many people had seen what she was capable of. And even though Stevens was willing to keep quiet, others might not be so discreet. Harrison picked up his phone and called down to the underground facility. "Rodriguez, bring Chen up to my office. We need to discuss her future with the unit." 20 minutes later, Sarah sat across from Harrison's desk, looking calm despite the chaos that had erupted around her. "How are you feeling?" Harrison asked. "Fine, sir. Ready to deploy with the team as scheduled." Harrison shook his head. "There's not going to be a deployment. at least not for you. Your cover has been compromised, and we can't risk sending you into the field when your real identity might be exposed." Sarah felt her heart sink. She had been looking forward to the mission, partly because it would give her something to focus on, other than the humiliation of the past few days. "Sir, I can still do my job," she said. "What happened with Martinez won't affect my performance." "I know it won't," Harrison replied. "But the fact remains that you can't continue operating under your current cover identity. Too many people have seen you fight, and some of them are going to start asking questions that we can't answer." Sarah stared at the floor, feeling like her world was falling apart. She had spent 8 years building her career in special operations, and now it seemed like one encounter with a bully was going to end everything. "What happens to me now?" she asked. Harrison smiled. "Nothing bad, I promise. We're going to transfer you to a new assignment where your skills can be put to better use." He pulled out a file folder and handed it to Sarah. Inside were orders transferring her to a training facility in Virginia where she would be responsible for teaching hand-to-hand combat to other special operations soldiers. "You'll be an instructor," Harrison explained, "teaching the next generation of operators the same skills that you used to defend yourself against Martinez. It's an important job, and it's one that you're uniquely qualified for." Sarah read through the orders, feeling a mixture of disappointment and relief. She would miss the excitement and danger of field missions, but she would still be serving her country and using her training to help others. "When do I leave?" she asked. "Next week. But before you go, there's one more thing we need to take care of." Harrison led Sarah downstairs to the underground facility, where Rodriguez, Park, and Thompson were waiting. They had set up a small celebration, complete with a cake and a banner that read, "Congratulations on your promotion." "Promotion?" Sarah asked. Rodriguez grinned. "They're making you a chief petty officer. Turns out that beating up 3 Marines in hand-to-hand combat is considered a demonstration of exceptional leadership potential." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. After days of feeling humiliated and powerless, her teammates were reminding her of who she really was and what she had accomplished. "I'm going to miss you guys," she said. "You better," Park replied. "But we'll stay in touch. And who knows, maybe someday we'll need an instructor to teach us some new tricks." Thompson handed Sarah a small wrapped box. Inside was a set of instructor's badges for her uniform, along with a note that read, "For the Marine who proved that size doesn't matter when you know how to fight." "Speaking of Marines," Rodriguez said, "have you heard what happened to Martinez?" Sarah shook her head. "No." "What?" "Court-martial," Park said with satisfaction. "Assault, harassment, conduct unbecoming, and about 6 other charges. His military career is over." "Good," Thompson added. "Maybe next time he'll think twice before picking on someone he doesn't understand." Sarah felt a sense of justice, but also a strange sadness. Martinez had destroyed his own career through his arrogance and prejudice, and while he deserved the consequences, she couldn't help feeling sorry for someone who had thrown away years of military service over his inability to treat other people with respect. 1 week later, Sarah stood outside the mess hall where everything had started. She was wearing her dress uniform for the transfer ceremony, and the new instructor's badges gleamed on her chest. Her orders were in her pocket, and her bags were packed in her room. As she walked through the doors, conversations stopped and heads turned. Everyone on the base had heard some version of the story by now. They knew that the quiet woman they had seen get humiliated by Martinez was actually someone with extraordinary training and capabilities. Some of the Marines looked at her with respect and admiration. Others seemed curious about who she really was and what she had been doing on the base. A few appeared intimidated, probably wondering if they had ever said or done anything that might have offended her. Sarah got her coffee and toast, just like she had every morning for the past 2 years. But this time, when she looked for a place to sit, 3 Marines immediately stood up and offered her their table. "Please, ma'am," one of them said, "take our seats. We were just finishing breakfast anyway." Sarah smiled and thanked them, but chose to sit at an empty table by herself. She wasn't looking for special treatment or recognition. She just wanted to enjoy her last meal on this base in peace. As she ate, Sarah reflected on everything that had happened. A week ago, she had been living a secret life, hiding her true identity and abilities from everyone around her. It had been lonely and frustrating, but it had also been necessary for the success of her missions. Now her secret was out, at least partially. People knew she was more than she appeared to be, even if they didn't know the specific details of her training or assignments. In some ways, it was a relief. She no longer had to pretend to be helpless or ordinary, but it also meant the end of one chapter of her life and the beginning of another. She would miss the adrenaline and danger of special operations missions, but she was looking forward to the chance to share her knowledge with other soldiers. As she finished her coffee, Sarah noticed a young female Marine sitting alone at a nearby table. The woman was small and Asian, probably new to the base, and she was being stared at by a group of male Marines who were making crude comments and laughing. Sarah recognized the look of discomfort and resignation on the young woman's face. It was the same expression she had worn countless times when dealing with harassment and discrimination throughout her military career. Sarah stood up and walked over to the young Marine's table. "Mind if I sit with you?" she asked. The woman looked up with surprise. "Of course not, ma'am. Please sit down." Sarah introduced herself and learned that the young woman's name was Jennifer Liu, and she had arrived at the base just 3 days earlier. She was a communication specialist, fresh out of training, and she was struggling to fit in with the other Marines. "It gets easier," Sarah told her. "You just have to prove yourself and show them that you belong here." "How do you do that when they won't give you a chance?" Jennifer asked. Sarah glanced over at the group of Marines who were still making comments. She stood up and walked over to their table, with Jennifer following nervously behind her. "Gentlemen," Sarah said in a voice that was polite but carried an unmistakable edge of authority, "I think you have something to say to Specialist Liu." The Marines looked up with expressions of confusion and growing concern. They had all heard the stories about Sarah, and none of them wanted to test whether those stories were true. We didn't mean anything by it," one of them stammered. "I think you did mean something by it," Sarah replied. "And I think you owe the specialist an apology." The Marines quickly apologized to Jennifer, who accepted their apologies with grace and dignity. As Sarah and Jennifer walked away, Sarah could hear the men behind them quietly discussing how they needed to be more careful about who they targeted with their jokes. "Thank you," Jennifer said as they returned to their table. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Sarah replied. "We look out for each other in the military. That's how it's supposed to work." As they finished their breakfast, Sarah found herself thinking about her new assignment. She would be teaching other soldiers how to defend themselves and how to overcome obstacles that seemed impossible, but maybe her most important lesson would be teaching them about respect and dignity, and about the importance of judging people by their character rather than their appearance. When it was time to leave, Sarah shook hands with Jennifer and gave her a piece of advice that had taken her 8 years to fully understand. "Don't try to be what other people expect you to be," Sarah said. "Be who you are, and let your actions speak for themselves. The right people will respect you for it, and the wrong people don't matter anyway." Jennifer nodded, clearly taking the words to heart. "Will I see you again?" "Probably not," Sarah admitted. "I'm transferring to a new assignment, but if you ever need someone to talk to, you can find me through official channels. And remember, you're stronger than you think you are. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." As Sarah walked away from the mess hall for the last time, she felt a sense of completion. She had started the week feeling humiliated and powerless, but she was ending it with a new understanding of her own strength and purpose. Martinez had thought he was putting her in her place when he slapped her that first morning. Instead, he had inadvertently revealed her true nature and opened the door to a new phase of her career. Sometimes the worst things that happened to you turned out to be the beginning of something better. Sarah climbed into the transport vehicle that would take her to the airport, where she would catch a flight to Virginia and her new life as an instructor. As the base disappeared behind her, she thought about all the young soldiers she would soon be training. They would learn how to fight, how to survive, and how to complete impossible missions under extreme pressure. But more importantly, they would learn that strength came in many forms, and that sometimes the most dangerous opponents were the ones who looked least threatening. Sarah Chen had spent 8 years proving that lesson to herself. Now it was time to teach it to others, and she was ready for the challenge. The vehicle pulled away from the base as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, carrying Sarah toward whatever came next in her remarkable military career. Behind her, the mess hall was filling up with Marines eating breakfast and going about their daily routines, most of them unaware that they had just witnessed the end of one story and the beginning of another. In the underground facility, Rodriguez, Park, and Thompson were already planning their next mission, secure in the knowledge that their former teammate had taught them all something valuable about courage, restraint, and the importance of knowing when to fight and when to walk away. And in a hospital room across the base, Martinez was beginning to understand that some lessons come with a price, and that the assumptions we make about other people can sometimes be the most dangerous mistakes we ever make. The story was over, but its lessons would continue to ripple through the lives of everyone who had been touched by it, reminding them that true strength often comes in unexpected packages, and that the quiet ones are sometimes the most dangerous of all.